our final presentation for the day. And I have already introduced you, but I've forgotten where I was. So the role of low code. Raj, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Take it away.
All right.
You're between them and alcohol, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a great place to be. Right? So talking about that, again, my name is Raj Krishnan. I'm from Microsoft. You know, when you're the last presenter, it should be either because you think you won't be able to enjoy that beer or a glass of wine without knowing what is the role of low code, or maybe the other reason, I don't want to think about the other reason. So what I'm going to do is just to make it short and maybe make it a little bit more interactive. So what are we trying to talk about today? I think if you don't say digital transformation, low code, and if you don't use those words, you're not cool. So you got to know what low code means. So what does it mean? I think personally, a lot of these things are driven by the demand, right? When you think about it, it's not that AI did not exist 30 years ago. And I still remember I used to run a call center. And one of the things that I had to do was to do a forecast and level my resources so that I can reduce my call drop rate, right? So what did I do? I went to the New York University, paid people a couple of $1,000s to take the historical data, do a little bit of linear programming, and come up with it. This existed 30 years ago. So what has changed? I think what is that there are two things I think drives, One is that you're getting good at what you do and you've hit the limits and you want to do more. And the second thing that kind of helps you get there is the availability of technology, right? Those two things kind of really propels us to take advantage of and to get better at. So why are we talking about low code? These are some of the reasons, right? And what does changing workforce have to do with low code? Because a lot of people are technology savvy. Another story. I remember I was in the medical transcription business. And those days, we remember, if you're as old as me, then you went to a telephone, you dialed in and you dictated, and somebody transcribed it. And I still remember that I went to these doctors, we used some of this Sony dictation machine with a chip in it, and we told him how to do it. And a week later, we went to him, and then we took the chip out, and there was nothing. Because he's been dictating on it without knowing it was on, right? So it's sometimes the ability of the people and the technology readiness is a factor in what is available or what we need. The fact that there are, by 2025, 75% of the global workforce would be millennials is a big factor in this, what we call low code. And I'll explain what we mean by low code. And then the thing is the number of applications that are coming out, both mobile applications and the applications. They're saying that it'll be about 500 million more apps than in the last 40 years will be in the 5 years. And then this is the biggest thing I see, right? You look at everything, there's so much room for automation. And people are just realizing is that people are still using spreadsheets. They're still using paper and pencil. They're transferring data. There's so much room to automate, and the systems are disconnected. How do you bring one information from, let's say, SAP to Salesforce? Or because we have all this best of breed systems and they're not connected, right? So there's so much automation potential. And of course, the latest talk of the industry, labor shortage, right? Even in countries like India, there's been a dramatic development where people used to outsource, Philippines or India, where the salaries have doubled. I don't know how this happened in a couple of years, whatever the analytical factors are, there is a dramatic change in the number of people that are available and people who can be, to hire the people. So it is the remote capability, and a lot of the GDP requirements. So a lot of these things are driving some of this, what we call low code. In particular, this is the one that is probably more focused on low code. So I'm kind of trying to justify why we should be talking about low code, right? So there are about 500 million more apps, and there are 4 million developer shortfall. So how do we, like I said, the needs kind of dictate what technology we should be using. And then when I talk about it, a lot of people say, what is this thing, low code? Is this a new application, or is this a new system, or is this new paradigm? What is it, right? So I just want to tell you what we mean by low code and no code. And then, you know what, let me just kind of, let's see if I can show something. So let me start with what we mean by no code, right? So here is an Excel. So I go here and then I type in Microsoft, right? And then I come here and then I click on this thing here, something called stocks, right? So what this thing did is, based on this, it took the sticker and pulled this. Then I say, okay, this is the one that I want. And then it identified the company, and then look here, right? So I want to know what is the, let's say 52-week high, or I want to know something like a price earning ratio. What is the price now today? This is, you didn't write a single piece of code. This is what I say, no code. But whenever we say no code, something else has happened. The people who build Excel have added these capabilities so that a power user or a regular user can actually, without writing a single piece of code, add some of this richness and get the relevant data. So that's one of the examples of no code. So I want to give you another example of low code. I'll try to start. If it takes time, I'll do. So here, this is something what we call a bot composer. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to build a bot. I'm not a programmer, but I want to do an FAQ. So I want to do a core bot with a Q&A maker for frequently asked questions. And then what I do is, okay, I'll call this, business leaders demo 1. And let's forget about rest of the things. This is one level above your no code. So it is, I'm trying to kind of build something to create a bot that uses frequently asked questions from a website, right? So it is kind of getting this template. So a lot of the work has been already done. Again, if it takes time, I'll go to the one that I've already built. So all I have to do was, I just went to, I noticed somebody who did the presentation is from Craft. So I said, okay, I'll try to do this. And then I copy this. Then I go to my bot composer. So it takes a little bit of time. Then what I will do, all I'll have to do is give this FAQ page to this composer and then ask it to kind of do a natural language processing of what's in the FAQ, create all the questions so that, so I'm just going to say demo KHC, right? So it's going to create that. And then I'm going to put this URL here, right? So this is the FAQ, and it's I won't get into multi-transaction, but it is just to have so it is already creating this knowledge bot, right? So what this has done is just using a drag and drop. I'm using a no code, low code solution, and now it's there, right? And if you do this, it says set up a Q&A maker, and I'm going to use, it even tells me the resources. So I'm going to just log into this. Now you see that it's slightly a little bit more than what I showed you on the Excel, but still it's something that I don't need to write any piece of code. And all I need to do is, I do have a subscription that I'm going to use. And it is just a resource that I need to build all those language processing. And I will use that so that it can create that, the the frequently asked question and create that FAQ as a bot, right? So now it is done, and it's all there. Now, let me see if I can start this. If not, I'll again, for the sake of time, I might. So all that I did was just identify the FAQ, use the existing resources, and develop a bot, all with just no code, but using some of the resources that are available, right? And once it's done, I can even test the bot for the FAQ and see how it works when it gets ready. If it doesn't get ready, then I'll use the existing one, and that's happening. Okay. So what do we mean by, okay, so now it is ready. Right? So then I can say here, open this. Welcome to your bot. And if I go back, there was one thing called payment method. So I'm just going to say payment method. And if I do this, so what it says shopheinz.com, we accept Visa, MasterCard. And then I'll say, I saw in the FAQ, it says phone order. I don't even have to type in the whole thing. The language processing has already done all that. And then it says, okay, you can place order. So if you look at all this is done by just scanning the whole thing, decomposing it, understanding the intent, and then creating questions and understanding them. Now, that's another no-code. So I just wanted to give you a perspective of what do we mean by low code and no code. Low code, no code is something where you don't write any code, but take advantage of the enhanced functionality of a product or a tool. Low code is either using tools, you try to write as less code as possible, but be able to create composable applications. So that's what we mean by low code and no code. So let's get back to that thing now that you know what we are talking about. So why is it important? So we talked about the shortage and things, and Gartner, they're predicting that there'll be 70% of the new applications will be low code, no code applications. And then they're even saying that there'll be more than one low code tools. There could be 4+ tools. The reason to me is the next thing, right? Now, what is the biggest thing you hear from business people? Oh, these IT guys, they can't get anything done, or there's delay. And the IT guys say, no, give me the money and I can't do it. So a lot of these low code tools are being bought not by IT, but by the business users. That's why you see 3 or 4 tools in an organization, marketing department goes and buys something maybe. So there is a little bit of a chaotic thing because it is a business-driven decision-making rather than a centralized IT decision-making. So that's another thing that, and I'll come back to it as to why it is important, how do you control that, right? So the thing about low code and no code, again, it's another application, there's no magic, right? Is the control and the responsibility. When you buy a packaged application, what happens? You have no control. And if you tell SAP, they'll tell you, if you customize, you're in trouble. Try to use it the way it is. So you have less control. And by the same token, you can always blame them when things don't work, right? From a responsibility perspective. But on the other hand, when you do everything by yourself, you have an extremely good control. You can do whatever you want, change the UI and customize it. But of course, then your responsibility is very high. So you have the space between these packaged apps where you have no control, less responsibility, to custom development of an entire application where you have a high control, but a lot of responsibility. And another big thing, when you go to the other extreme of custom development, is the technical debt. You notice typically when you start an application, oh, it's all features and functionality. Year 2, it's all about maintenance. Oh, that thing doesn't work. And you find that the application becomes less and less evolving because they're constantly fixing things. They don't have time to create new functionalities and features. Again, this is another driver where the low code can actually play a big role. So this is the sweet spot for low code, right? Where It is not an entirely custom development, or in other words, I'm not going to build an ERP system using low-code tools like Power Apps or a Mendix or an Out system, right? On the other hand, it's not like an Excel. So it lies somewhere in between, trying to give you a little bit more flexibility so that you can connect systems and build solutions without entirely building custom or going and customizing an existing packaged application. So that is the sweet spot for low code, right? So that's what I think we already had these things. And the biggest thing is, and it is a truth, and there's statistics to prove, anyone who is using low code, there's been more innovation. There's been less maintenance, but more features, right? So that's because now people can quickly do something and without relying heavily on IT. And I'll tell about how do we control that, right? But that's the reason that you see what we call the citizen developer movement evolving. This kind of charts that tells you, the technical skills, right? Yeah, if you want a high C#, .NET, Java, they are at the bottom, and the JavaScript, maybe the front-end developers. And the low code is where you find skills that is somewhere from the guy who can do that Excel data add-in to the guy who can build a Mendix or a Power Apps solution. And funny, when we talk about low code, this is not a new concept. Any of you who are old enough, you have lived through the hell of Lotus Notes, Access, of sprawling applications, everybody creating their own solutions, right? So this is not a new concept, but there are certain things that have changed to make it a little bit more controllable and palatable. So I'll talk about that. So this is somewhere between here where you don't have to be an extremely high-end programmer, and you can be a power user. You can enable some of your users to build solutions that solves their business problem, right? That is the big thing. I just want to kind of give you a case study that I did with one of the partners that will kind of give you an idea as to where a low-code solution is being used. So this is one of the food supply chain a company. Actually, they make a pet food. One of the biggest challenges that they had was they'll get suppliers from vendors delivering things in their dock, and it's kind of chicken liver, all kinds of things. And then they make the final product, which is the pet food. They had no way of tracking when was it assembled, when was the processing done, and when was what is in it. So there's a recall. They got to make some rough estimate. Anybody, if you remember that lettuce recall, right? People had to dump things because they had absolutely no traceability. So I worked with a partner. I'm just mentioning them because they helped me build this, Beyond Key, who did in a 3-month a great low-code application using Power Apps. And what is the scenario? The vendor comes in, they deliver in the dock, they have an invoice. And now, one of the things is you scan the invoice and parse it and use the OCR to identify the vendor, and then look up the vendor. And once it's done, you take the pallet, you create a QR code label, stick on it, and now you have traceability from day one. This vendor supplied this beef on this day, right? Now I go to the next stage where I'm picking some chicken liver and a meat. I read the QR code. Now I get a new QR code which says, on this day I picked from this pallet, from chicken liver and this thing, and this is my next. So every process I do, I read from the QR code, generate a new QR code, and go through the process. And by the time in the package, I have the final QR code, which has the traceability from end to end. And all this is done without touching your main ERP system, without touching anything else, but integrating with all these systems. So that's what the application did. So I'll just give you a high level. There were the 4 activities. One is scanning the invoice using OCR technology, form recognizer. So the guy who is loading it from the dock will read this, scan it, and the scanned invoice will immediately do a lookup for the vendor and lookup of all the items that you see at the bottom, and then find out. And now we create a QR code and stick it on the pallet. So the next time when I go to the process, if I'm using 2 pallets, I read the QR code, create a new QR code, create a new assembly, and put it in the storage. So every stage, I create a new QR code to know what I've added, what processing that I've done, and then I can track the entire thing. So this is one of the outputs. This is done in 3 months, and this is one of the outputs, right? I can look at all the stages. What was the tracking number? Who did it? On what day? Who is the vendor? So you get end-to-end traceability. So if there is a recall, I exactly know, based on the label, which vendor's product should I be tracking, which should I be getting rid of, who should not be my supplier anymore. So that is a great low-code solution. Now, how do you do this? We started with a business process. Okay, how does the thing flow from the dock to the final product? We mapped it. And then what kind of data should flow? I need to get the vendor data. I need to get the staging, what process is done. So we build the data flow. And then using dummy data, we build the prototype. And then we train some of these invoices because they had about 10 or 15 invoice types. So we use the old invoices to know which field lies where, so that as soon as I scan, it immediately says, here's the vendor name, here is the date, here is the item, and we train those. Now, this aspect is one of the most important things, integrate. Now, if you look at all the low-code solutions, what do they have in common? They provide you out-of-the-box connectors. Like, for example, if you take Mendix, Out, or Power Apps, we have about 300 connectors that will connect with Dropbox, they'll connect with SAP, they'll connect with Salesforce. So you don't have to write a single piece of code. You just simply say, here's my Salesforce URL, here's my authentication, and now it can actually look up a customer, update an order. All those things can be done through those integration. And then the other thing that we did was, before production, we observed and test. There was a funny incident that happened. We were using this small QR code label. Then suddenly we realized these guys had about 10 feet high where they were putting some of these pallets. And these small labels, we couldn't read it. So luckily, before we bought multiple printers, we bought a bigger QR code label that I can scan with a phone standing on the floor. So testing that before making some of the final decisions. And then finally, all this was done in about 3 months without touching the main system, right? Some of the people would say, why don't you do it in SAP? Why don't you do it in ERP? You know what this packaged applications, it's a formidable task to go and add any functionality to some of them. That's why these low-code solutions, without disrupting your existing solutions, enhances some of these capabilities that you need, right? I won't go through, I want to leave some time for questions. Here is another thing that we did. You have a healthcare system, right? There could be Epic, there could be Cerner, there could be other. But this one, the COVID, they were not built for COVID. They were built for some other purposes. So what we did was we mapped the user journey, like people in a place. How can they be notified? And all this was done using a low code. But if you look at it, again, I won't get into the things. Here, we had a portal. There was a low-code portal where they could go and register. And they had a mobile applications when they were checking in, all of them into a database. And if you look at here, anybody who go with Fire HL7 messaging, it connected with the main EMR or systems that is there, right? So instead of going and customizing all this, they used very simple tools to build that interface for the vaccination administration. Another great use case and a business process that you can enable using low code. Now, one of the things that, and I said about Lotus Notes, I said about Access, why is it different this time around? Because I think what I call fusion development is that we are not saying we don't need developers, but we're not saying I don't need the JavaScript guy, I don't need the C# or a Java guy. We need them. What we need them is to make sure there is integrity in the data. But the end user doesn't have to write an API. That's what the professional developer will write, the data, how to get the data, how to pull all the data from multiple systems, create an API. Now the end user, all they do is, hey, I want to get the Salesforce open case. Now the professional developer would have developed an API. Now the end user, there could be multiple end users, but they all leverage the same API so that there's integrity in data. the problem we had with Lotus Notes and Access, everybody had their own data store. And the guy who had the latest data was different. He must have copy and pasted it from the latest reports. We are trying to avoid that. We just want the best of those Lotus Notes and Access, plus the integrity of the data. That's what I call fusion development, where the professional developers support without them having to write all those front end and applications. Let the end user have that flexibility, but let's make sure that the data is secure, the data is accurate, and there is a single repository or a single way of accessing the data for this, what we call the low-code, no-code applications, right? So biggest challenge, this is what I think, the governance, right? So people are used to custom development. People say that, you know what, hey, there is a developer, we have a source control, we have a CI/CD. How do you now create this chaotic environment where everybody can build an app? And is this free for all? Does it mean we don't need IT? Absolutely not. What it means is enabling the end users, but we still need those governance, right? First thing I said, like a Fusion, there should be approved data sources. And Fusion team should be the one that's controlling what data these low-code or no-code people are using. I was just listening to the previous talk about agile methodology. There's no reason why you won't do it. They are a 2-week sprint. You should use user stories, and you should make sure that it follows that methodology. The only difference is you're not writing a big application. You're using the data, control that through the agile methodology, make sure that you're doing it for the right reason, make sure, like somebody mentioned previously, use the OKR, make sure why you're doing this, and control that. Otherwise, you'll have the same Lotus Notes confusion and chaotic thing. And you should use source control for all of this. Develop a sandbox so that you're not anywhere. And to me, the biggest challenge is discoverability, right? Then everybody starts building all this. How do you make sure that something doesn't exist, or people are not just building hundreds of same applications? So you need to find a way with some metadata and have some governance as to who can do what. But what you're doing is you're reducing the friction between the business and IT by enabling some of the people who do not have the IT skills, but still want to meet their business need in a reduced cycle time, right? So governance is one of the most important things that we need to control when we use low-code, no-code solution. Okay, so what did we look at? I think low-code is an unavoidable thing, particularly with our pandemic shortage and savvy users with technical ability and the extremely expensive technical talent. We need to find a way. It's almost a necessity now that you cannot say, I can't do this because there's no programmer, right? So it is almost a necessity. And I hope I gave you clarity on what is low code and what is no code. It can span from, hey, drag and drop to, yeah, slightly do a little bit of a configuration to some JavaScript code. So it can be anywhere between the span that I mentioned, right? And there are a lot of platforms out there. Microsoft's Power Apps is one of them. Mendix has a great solution, OutSystems. So there are a lot of people in the market for you to kind of look at and choose the right thing. And I think, because I believe in the future prediction of Gartner, that you need to incorporate this. It is not a replacement. It is not a brand new technology. It is an enabler for you to make it productive and address some of your business problems without getting into the pipeline of your IT and the traditional way of developing applications.
Raj, that's tremendous. You can't see me waving to tell you you only have 0 minutes left. But
what a timely...
I said you're out of time. We're out of time. But thank you so much. Do we have questions or comments for Raj? Thank you. That was tremendous. You know, what's funny is when you first started talking about this, the first thing I thought of was Lotus Notes. Because that's what I used to do. And it was a huge challenge because I used to teach application development and systems administration, and I would get people sending their secretaries and administrative assistants to development class, to App Dev 2 class, to App Dev 3 class. I'm like, oh, they said they could do it. Yeah, no, you can't, right? And the biggest thing was the architecture, was the data. Everything was inconsistent. So I
Yeah.
totally agree that the governance on these things are critical. And think of what Raj is saying. The data has to be understood. The data has to be governed and managed, right? And the data architecture has to be governed and managed. You can build an interface to get to that data. You can build these applications, but they really require that we understand the process, right? We can't automate what we don't understand. We can't automate a mess. And so understanding the business process and being able to configure these applications is really, I totally agree with you, really the direction of this. Thoughts, comments, feedback? Guys, what do you think? Questions for Raj? I know it's late, you're tired. Raj, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was tremendous.